love, social convention, gender roles, and religion. Charlotte Bronte's most famous novel challenges ideas on all these topics, and we are here to discuss it. I'm Charlene.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Jane Eyre Files. Chapter 34. Formed for Labor. Hello, husband.
Hello, my helpmeet.
Not fellow laborer?
No, helpmeet. I have no idea what that is, but it was like, I saw that phrase used twice in the chapter.
Oh, yeah.
Helpmeet.
That's exactly what St. John wants.
I don't know.
He wants some help.
Yeah, but helpmeet. Like we talk about another term, meet cute, right? That's a term for in a movie when the romantic comedy, when the male and the female lead get together. Meet cute. But what is the helpmeet?
I have not looked into the origin of that word, but it's kind of a cool word, I think.
Disappointed. Before we get started, we joke about it all the time that we started this podcast, and I'm always curious who's listening. Mm-hmm. Is it if besides our friends or maybe some of the people that who are big fans of Jane Eyre? Mm-hmm. So it's always really flattering when we find out that we have people out there that we've never met.
Right,
listen to this show. And one in particular, we're going to go to Brooklyn, New York. And Brooklyn, New York, I didn't realize, was around during the time of Charlotte Bronte. Mm-hmm. It exists back then. And I did want to give a shout out to one of our listeners, a young lady named Avital Yermayev. I think she's apparently found our show and has been enjoying it and has been
really
reading
nice.
the book. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Was in touch with her mother, Daniela. So I wanted to give the Yermayevs a shout out and thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you for listening. All right, there's a lot of stuff to talk about in this chapter.
It's a long one.
Yeah, let's just get right into the SparkNote summary for Chapter 34. Jane closes her school for Christmas and spends a happy time with her newfound cousins at Moor House. Diana and Mary are delighted with the improvements Jane has made at school, but St. John seems colder and more distant than ever. The SparkNote summary says school, but I think it should be at the house. Anyways. He tells Jane that Rosamond is engaged to a rich man named Mr. Granby. One day, he asks Jane to give up her study of German and instead to learn Hindustani with him, the language he's learning to prepare for missionary work in India. As time goes by, St. John exerts a greater and greater influence on Jane. His power over her is almost uncanny. This leaves Jane feeling empty, cold, and sad, but she follows his wishes. At last, he asks her to go to India with him to be a missionary and to be his wife. She agrees to go to India as a missionary, but says that she will not be his wife because they are not in love. St. John harshly insists that she marry him, declaring that to refuse his proposal is the same as to deny the Christian faith. He abruptly leaves the room. As he should.
She is no bird, and no net ensnares her.
No, not even a Christian net.
Yeah. We're going to get to that at the end of our discussion. I don't like people using Christian faith to provide guilt on other people. Yeah.
Well, we'll start at the beginning of this chapter where we get Jane enjoying cleaning Moor House to prepare for Diana and Mary's arrival. And I love her eagerness and enjoyment because it's very satisfying to make a house shiny and clean, isn't it?
I knew you would say that. I'm sure, you're right. It is nice to see that Jane is so excited about the simple pleasures of homemaking, right? I mean, because I guess when she was at Thornfield, she's one of the servants.
She didn't have to deal with that,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the funny part is now that you and I have just bought a house, I feel like I'm actually starting to feel that way myself.
Oh, yeah. When I see little dust gathering in the corner, we can't have that. This house is we bought it so shiny and new, so we have to keep it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always wanting to tinker in the yard, but I feel the same way, like with the first impression people have on the outside of the house. So, yeah, it is fun. It is fun. I mean, again, we've been, living here in Los Angeles, we're apartment dwellers so much, and, you don't take as much pride. And I think with Jane, she was at Lowood, and I said Thornfield, she's somewhere else. Like, she hasn't really had...
That's a good point. She doesn't take as much pride in cleaning, probably, but now...
Gateshead, they would have had...
Feels a little
servants.
ownership.
Yeah, exactly. Especially now that she's throwing her money around. And, and she feels like she does own the place almost.
Right. Almost. But we have what I like to say is a bit of a dark shadow at Moor House in the form of St. John Rivers. Because he just doesn't join in the revelries. He encourages Jane not to spend too much time cleaning and decorating. because I feel like St. John has so much more of a coldness to him compared to the previous chapter where he had this kind of humor that I enjoyed, and now it's missing.
Yeah, he's still that stick in the mud, right?
Yeah, we can't forget he did say he's a cold man.
That's true. And I was wondering, I was going to ask you this question when I first got done reading this very lengthy chapter, was, do you think St. John is distraught because he knew he wanted to ask Jane to marry him, but then it got weird when he found out that she was related to him?
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I guess there's two ways of thinking about it, because on the one hand, yeah, it's awkward, but then I don't think in that time it was that awkward.
Apparently not.
Right? So maybe he thought, oh, this makes it easier. Like Jade is already like a dependent, like depends on me for brotherly love. Well, we could just shift that to
maybe that might
something
help
else.
Convince her to be in a loveless marriage if you're just like, well, we're already related.
Yeah, we work so well together, Jane. Let's just put a ring on it.
We're familial,
God.
But I also the other question I had was that is there a chance that maybe he's just so devout that he can't seem to enjoy his sister's company when he would be much happier tending to the members of his congregation?
Well, I mean, that does seem like that's the way he's been for a large chunk of his adult life. Maybe as a child too, that he really didn't want. He was more concerned with studies or books or something than hanging out with his sisters.
Yeah, but his sisters are coming back, or they haven't seen each other in how long has it been? A year or something like that. And then it's like, no, I got to get out and go to this
very emotional
parishioner's house. Yeah, and I think Charlotte even describes it. I've got the exact quote. Is she says, "quote He had performed an act of duty." And then she later says he was on better terms with himself. Right.
He just seems to really thrive on challenging himself to achieve something, which in this case would be, walking out in this inclement weather and helping out one of his flock, I guess. And that seems to be something that makes him feel good, which, it's fine, I guess.
He's more reserved. He's antisocial.
Yeah, sentimentally enjoying the company of his family seems maybe a waste of time to him, and he doesn't embrace that as much.
When he could be enjoying the company of a good book.
Well, I should say that there's that point where Jane comments that it's, I think it was, quote, St. John's unsocial custom to read at meals. And I do love reading during meals, especially if I'm eating alone, but I can't quite bring myself to be so unsocial as to read with a group of people. But I do.
You could.
Oh, well.
If you tried, you could.
If I get away with it, maybe, yeah.
I'll let the listeners know there was a moment when I got done reading the chapter that I was explaining to Charlene. I said I thought there was one particular part where I thought St. John reminded me of you, and you were like horrified, like what? And
How dare you?
Yeah, in this chapter of all the chapters, what would you think? And I was like, I got to remember what it was. And you were like, oh, is it the part where he said he likes to read it while he's eating? Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Well, that's fair. I appreciate that you know that about me.
Yeah, hopefully it's the only thing you have in common, right?
I should think so.
I think you told me that you said you one time stopped on the way home from work to eat at a diner by yourself and wound up reading. This is before you met me.
Right. Yeah, I think I just really had a craving for something at this restaurant, and I thought, you know what, let me just treat myself on the way home from work. And since I was by myself, I had a book with me and might as well read that while I'm sitting there.
I mean, I guess it's like reading the paper or something, right?
If very yourself. True.
I think I heard that was years ago. I heard someone say that's a pickup. It's like something a pickup artist would do is you sit at the bar by yourself and make it seem like you bring the paper with you. And you make it seem like the paper was just sitting at the bar. And if it has a crossword puzzle in it, then you start doing the crossword puzzle, and then you could ask the woman next to you for clues. And then, but you have to bring a newspaper with you and pretend like you just found it at the bar.
Oh, wow. Just sullying the art of going out by yourself and just reading.
Yeah, for sure. That would be your thing. That's your thing, you said.
But before we jump into the really meat of this chapter, I just want to mention throwaway, which is Rosamond's kind of gotten rid of quickly because St. John just says, oh, she's going to get married. And then she's dispensed with. So goodbye to Rosamond, but I wonder if that kind of made St. John feel free to propose to Jane.
I'm not sure. It's true that it was kind of weird to see her introduced only to depart so quickly, especially when we thought that her and Jane were kind of hitting it off.
Oh, yeah.
But then I feel like maybe she was just a means to an end to show St. John's internal struggles between love and duty.
Yeah, she wasn't really her own fully realized character. She was there for a reason. And now that reason is done. Well,
and I'm going to ask you, I honestly think that St. John would have proposed to Jane even if Rosamund wasn't engaged. It kind of reminds me of a lot of Rochester ditching Blanche for Jane. He didn't have to pair her up. He still was going to go for Jane anyway. And so I think St. John probably would have done the same thing. He clearly didn't have the greatest amount of feelings for her, or maybe he did, but he just couldn't be with her, right?
Yeah. Right, yeah. I wonder. I mean, I'm sure St. John doesn't really care, for himself emotionally, whether or not he proposes to Jane before Rosamund finds someone. But did he feel that it would have been a little disrespectful to Rosamund to, already announce an engagement, and, Rosamund clearly had interest in him, and maybe Rosamund would feel a little bit bitter towards Jane.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so it worked out.
Yeah, I guess it did.
Yeah. So then we come to a point in this book where Jane starts to mention that St. John seems to have like a power over Jane, because there's a moment when she's going to Morton where she gives her like weekly class, and she doesn't want to complain because it's pretty bad weather, it's winter, because it will vex St. John. And then later on he kind of forces her to learn Hindustani because she was learning.
Does everyone want to learn Hindustani?
Yeah, I mean, you want to learn a language that you probably have no intention of being able to speak, unlike German, which maybe she'd be able to travel to Germany at some point and it would be useful. But
it's a parlor trick that you can bring out at parties or something.
I guess.
I can speak Hindustani.
Right. But yeah, so I see that Jane is curbing her vivacity and her personality, which is something she did not have to do with Mr. Rochester, just to point out.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's actually difficult. It's kind of sad to see Jane sort of returning to this role of servitude.
Right.
You know, I think, like you said, her vivacity in attempting to sort of break free of the situation is probably, I think it's why this book has stood out for the test of time. Like everything she's been through, I think like she really should put her foot down rather than just sort of going along with it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's like she feels that she has to cater to St. John in some way because she feels so grateful to him, and he has such a strong personality, and he seems to be a good man, so she feels maybe that she should follow whatever he says because he is a quote better man than her or better person.
Okay, yeah. Use the finger quotes for that.
Yes,
for sure.
Like huge air quotes on that one.
Yeah, for sure. And then you find out that he's like been observing her for all these months, right?
Yeah, he does mention that, and which is something that I think Rochester did when he first came back to Thornfield, and he was kind of watching her, take care of Adele and get a kind of a feel for her personality. But for St. John, it does seem more that his motivation for observing Jane is just to see if she would suit his purpose.
Oh yeah, I kind of get that. And again, with Rochester, he's got a whole staff of people. There's a lot of hustle and bustle where when it comes to Jane and St. John, no one else is around. Right?
Oh, is
not
it
counting
creepier?
The kids. No, I mean, I guess it's easier to just observe that person if there's no one else to take your distraction away. Yeah, and plus, I feel like it's also really uncomfortable the way that. Did you notice when I was reading it? It feels like he keeps leading her on. Like he's just always asking about her ambition or whether she could do that job forever. You know, and it's like we talk about foreshadowing, and it's really blatant. You and I, obviously, you have read this book many times. I have read the book one prior time. But once you know already that he's going to propose, it's a little bit weird when you read the chapter before and this chapter where it's like some of the way that he talks, where it's like, oh man, he's really trying to steer her toward this, right?
Yeah. Well, he definitely had this plan in place, and I guess he saw he saw something in her. He explains it more about what he sees in her that will be great as a missionary's wife. But I don't know if you think so, but St. John's reasoning for Jane to be a missionary is convincing to me. I think that Jane is strong and diligent and persevering. She would be a great helper to St. John, and she even thinks that she could show him inner strength that he doesn't even know about.
Oh man. a woman thinking they could change a man. That's bad news right there.
Right. But did you think that St. John's argument for her to be a missionary is convincing?
I mean, I feel like he's certainly persuasive and he makes some good points, but then he just went about it all wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, and I think perhaps the women of that era maybe the women of that era didn't need to be in love to get married, and I think, but Jane's different, right? Like that isn't going to work. And you would imagine that if he's supposedly been this perceptive and he's been observing her for 10 months, did he not ever get the sense that she's kind of independent and she doesn't necessarily just follow everybody else's customs?
Oh, well, yeah. It doesn't seem like she kind of showed that side of her with the way that she's kind of catering to him, like I mentioned before, where she doesn't want to express her reluctance to go to Morton if it's bad weather, or she doesn't want to say she can't learn Hindustani because she's not interested.
Oh, so maybe she seems more subservient to him.
Yeah, so he's surprised by this independent streak of hers.
Oh, okay. But then, like you said, she's only told them so much about the Rochester situation.
Yeah, so he doesn't even know that she's had this experience of love, and I think that kind of saves her from this potential loveless marriage that St. John is offering, because otherwise I can see Jane going along with St. John's plan.
Really? You think? I mean, I don't automatically think that she would have gone along with it. You know, I think she's got money now, she's got a worthwhile profession, and she has some newfound family. You know, why immediately leave that all behind?
If she still thought of St. John as someone to admire and someone she wants to please, then maybe she would have kept going with that and accepted his marriage proposal.
I don't know. Like I said, I feel like she has her faith, but she's not so devout. Like this is something where if Helen, absolutely.
Helen would have accepted?
Yeah, best character in the book.
Would that have been a good opportunity or situation for her?
I don't know. Perhaps.
She could probably do better.
Well, I mean, but then the two of them would be just a dynamite combo for the Lord right there, you know? But I mean, as much as I think Helen would be a good fit, I just don't necessarily think Jane. I mean, yeah, she talks about how she's like, she kind of tries to talk herself into it. You know, as she's saying, okay, I can go as his assistant or as his sister, but not as his wife. And it's kind of tough to read that part because, you know, it's so easy. You can just tell if you've been reading this book for 33 chapters, you know, as soon as he proposes, you're like, there's no way she's saying yes.
Oh, right.
But then as it goes along, again, it's a very long chapter. She's got a lot of time to think.
Yeah.
And she starts kind of trying to come around to it. And it's like, did you find yourself going, what are you doing? Like, you don't need to do this.
Right.
You're Jane Eyre. Right? Like,
it's awesome.
Yeah.
You could do better.
Not necessarily that you're going to have to end up with a Rochester eventually. It's more just like, this can't be what you would want.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's just me.
I don't know. It's a mark of the persuasiveness of St. John, I think. Just that he is able to sway her a little bit. But, you know, good for Jane to kind of stick to her guns. Even though she does agree to go as a missionary, just not as his wife.
Yeah, it's almost like she just doesn't want to make him unhappy.
Yeah.
But he's a very unhappy person. I mean, he's happy when he's serving the Lord.
Yeah.
But at other times he's very unhappy. He's a very stubborn guy, you know.
It's a weird sort of happiness for him. But
yeah, misplaced.
Where are my powers for such an undertaking? I do not feel them. Do not persuade me to attempt what I cannot perform.
You can. Have I not observed you? In the village school you performed well, a labour uncongenial to your inclinations. In the calm with which you learnt of your inheritance, I read of a mind clear of the vice of Demas. Lucre has no undue power over you. In the resolute readiness with which you cut your wealth into 4 shares, I recognized a soul that revelled in the flame and excitement of sacrifice. Jane, you are docile, diligent, courageous, very gentle, and very heroic. Cease to mistrust yourself. I trust you unreservedly. As a conductress of Indian schools and a helper among Indian women, your assistance will be to me invaluable.
So what do you think about St. John's stubbornness in not wanting to bring a young woman to India with him unless she is his wife? Do you think that makes sense?
I mean, that just seems like a very antiquated thought.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it was taboo at the time for, a man and a woman to like even be seen together if they weren't, related, like brother, sister, or married, or, they need a chaperone, a woman needs a chaperone.
But then, did male missionaries only have male assistants at that time?
Or a wife?
It had to be, yeah. I mean, again, I don't know how missionary work works.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but
I would imagine especially if you have a man who's got a woman who's half his age, they're just, like you said, part of the flock, and they're trying to spread the word. I don't imagine there's some rule that says they have to be married, unless it's a situation where there's not enough lodging where they're going, and so they have to cohabitate.
I think that plays into it. Yeah,
maybe they're in some mud hut somewhere,
right?
They're curled up together, and
yeah, I mean that would be curious too, because obviously I think that's very English thinking, society structure. But in India, are they as concerned about men and women commingling, cohabitating if they're not married? Yeah. I don't really know. Could
you not just go around introducing people and by saying, this is my helpmeet?
Implies a very platonic relationship.
Yeah, exactly. We're both here to get you to listen to the word of Jesus Christ.
Right. But yeah, I think that even so, sort of Jane downplaying St. John's concerns, that doesn't make as much sense to me, because I think it would really look bad on her, especially if she traveled with him, because, double standards for women, if a man traveled with a woman, it's fine, but if a woman traveled, she's ruined now. She's clearly damaged goods now.
Now, see, you would be more up on your Victorian era etiquette than I would. So
I mean, this is really just me reading different books from that time period or other kind of like Regency novels. So I hope that they have not led me astray in this knowledge.
Yeah, and again, this is why I don't read.
This is why you don't read.
This is why I don't read.
Because you don't want knowledge.
well, just because I'm just like, that's how it was like back then. And then again, I feel like, is this the reason that this book stands out so much? Because Jane is sort of unconventional, and this bold and headstrong demeanor that she has as she tries to rise above her station. Is that why 175 years later, some married couple is talking about this on a podcast? Because it's just...
Well, it does point to Jane really thinking that she and St. John are equals, that people should see them as they're just missionaries. Doesn't matter what kind of, there's nothing going on, and they can trust that. But, that's a very important part of this novel, is that men and women are equals. And I think that's something that Jane advocates.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's why I was excited to do this podcast, this sort of deep dive into this book to figure out, it's not just some Victorian era romance. Like, why is this book still being taught in schools or is being talked about as much as it is? And I think it is. Like you said, you don't think about it now. Right. Yeah. We talk about the Beatles being the best band ever, and it's people go, but that's just plain old pop music, and you're like, well, it wasn't at the time.
Very good point. Yeah.
We've been listening to bands that have been inspired by them for so many years, and we've been reading books, or we've been growing up in a society where men and women are more equal. I mean, it's probably not completely equal, unfortunately.
Not yet.
But they're more equal to where when you're reading it, you're like, I don't understand. Why would she go along with this? But back at the time, this was, like I said, out of the norm. And then the fact that she is so bold, maybe that's a reason that this book is so popular.
Yes,
and it found
I'm glad that you can see that too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So yeah, we have this very lukewarm proposal from St. John.
Ugh, lukewarm.
Where St. John just, instead of saying that he loves her, at least, or pretends that he can care for Jane, he focuses on Jane being the perfect laborer for him and someone he can, quote, retain absolutely till death, end quote. Wow. Oof. I don't think that's very swoon-worthy.
No. And then there's a moment where he says, quote, I claim you.
Oh, God.
And I absolutely cringed when I saw that. Yeah. And then there's a moment where I think toward the end of the chapter where you're like, yeah, Jane's coming back.
Yeah.
And Jane says the line, quote, I scorn your idea of love.
Yeah, I really appreciate that Jane, I guess, is kind of peeking through the curtain here. She can see St. John for who he is. He's just as fallible as she is. And she doesn't have to follow everything that he says because he doesn't have, that understanding of God that she thinks that he has. And I like that Jane finally speaks up for herself.
Yeah. And it's so funny because now it's like you have the Rochester proposal and you have the St. John proposal. And it certainly definitely presents a dichotomy between the feelings that Jane and Rochester have for each other and how St. John feels towards Jane, which is totally not requited, right?
No, can't even pretend to be a little bit affectionate towards her.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like, no matter what's going on, like, ever since she left Thornfield, she's still thinking about Rochester. It gets brought up every chapter.
Yeah, yep.
And this is a very long chapter, and it still manages, it's only a brief mention, but it's very passionate in the way that she describes how much she misses him, And so the thing I put in my notes here is I just wrote down, this ain't no love triangle.
No.
It's clearly...
Mr. Rochester does not have anything to worry about.
Yes, yeah. I know that, she might feel like, if he's forever gone and he's going to be with his wife and I don't want to be his mistress, then maybe I could be a missionary's assistant, but I'll always be in love with him.
Right.
And again, it's like, we talk about this all the time. I mean, I don't understand sometimes why would people want to be in a loveless marriage? I mean, there must be reasons. I'm sure there's probably some practical. Love should not be practical. Marriage should not be practical. But it's like you said, I think you mentioned to me off the air that, St. John could at least pretend to care for her, right?
Right, yeah.
And like you said, that cold, unfeeling side of him just comes out, and then he just starts bringing up God as an excuse. If don't do it for me, do it for God, and that's even worse.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I just, it's sad towards the end of this chapter where, St. John is processing, I guess, Jane's refusal of him, something that he really didn't expect because I guess she's been so submissive and accepting of everything he wanted her to do. So now he just has this cold shoulder that he gives to her, just silent treatment that is so manipulative.
Oh, yeah.
And just, hoping that she will change her mind, but not really acknowledging that she has a freedom of choice here because he just expects her to just say, okay, I'll do what you want.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's one of those things where, like I said, and then he kind of brings the faith and God and just starts to guilt trip her into it. And I think I told you before, the first word that came to mind when I saw that part was just, I thought it was gutless. I thought it was gutless, where you're just so desperate that you're just like, well, I'm going to try to shame her into this. And that's an even worse reason to get married is for guilt.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you feel this way too, but, St. John is presented at the, in the beginning at least, as a very sort of admirable character because he's so close to God and he acts so selflessly so much of the time.
Brings her in out of the cold, right?
Yeah, and he's always there for his parishioners. He wants to help out. But it does feel like the way that he does good and he benefits the world, that it really seems that it's only a way for him to be closer to God and not necessarily because he wants to help other people.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Like you used the term manipulative a minute ago, and I feel like that's the same way.
Yeah.
And who knows? I mean, maybe there are people that go into the clergy for the wrong reasons, like that. Where
I'm
it's
sure.
Just like, they're just going to sort of do it for themselves. And I'm wondering if, at the time in 1847, were there people who read this book and totally sided with St. John?
Maybe.
That were thinking like, what in the world? Well, come on, Jane, you have to do this.
Yeah, you're fit for it, so why don't you just do it?
Were there people that just threw the book away at this point and were like...
Yeah, other missionaries who were like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a wife like Jane.
Yeah.
And I don't have to actually talk to her or show affection to her, just have her set her tasks from day to day.
Meanwhile, all these missionaries' wives are reading this book and thinking, oh my God, there's something greater than my station. I don't know. But it's, again... It was a long chapter, and in a way, it was a very powerful chapter because it has its movements, it has its high points and low points, and it just there's a lot of drama happening. It seems like when Rochester proposes to Jane, it's kind of brief. It's awesome, but it's kind of brief. Whereas this one, they really kind of dwell on it for a while because it presents so much conflict. Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion, and they're just stating their cases to each other. It seems like. Yeah.
And it's argument and counter argument, right?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to go for here. Yeah,
pretty much. But all right. Well, before we wrap up, what is the interesting context that we have from this chapter? Because I think you've got a good one.
Oh, thank you. So, a lot of characters in this novel, they're based on real people that Charlotte Bronte knew, like Helen Burns, based on her sister. St. John seems to be based on someone that Charlotte Bronte knew, which is the Reverend Henry Nussey, who was the brother of Ellen Nussey, who was Charlotte Bronte's best friend. And Henry Nussey was known to be very earnest, pious, and methodical, and he actually proposed to Charlotte.
Really?
Yes. And did you know that Charlotte had 6 marriage proposals in her lifetime?
6?
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Jane needs to catch up, right?
Well, for sure. They play. It seems like every time I've seen Charlotte portrayed on screen or the pictures, she seems very dowdy, very kind of
a lot of the descriptions of her is that she wasn't a great beauty like Jane, and she was very tiny, and very shy too.
I'm wondering if some of these 6 marriage proposals were the same practical, functional marriages, where it's people that are religious or clergymen, no less, saying you'd be a good clergy wife.
Well, yes, the Reverend Henry Nussey actually did seem to just want a wife to help care for his parish, and didn't propose to Charlotte because he loved her. He actually didn't really know her that well. I was thinking it was just because she's Ellen's best friend and she was available. But
you think maybe Ellen might have been the inspiration for like Mary or Diana?
Well, actually, I haven't read that. I was thinking that they might be more based on Emily and Anne. Yeah. But we do have Charlotte's reply to Henry's proposal in the form of a letter, which has been preserved. I kind of just wanted, it's a great letter.
You should put this up on your Instagram page or something.
I'll try to. It's a little bit long.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put some quotes up, but
it was a good read. It reads like something Charlotte Bronte would have written. It's very poetic.
She does really let him down easy. So I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from this letter that she wrote. She says, quote, "I say that my answer to your proposal must be a decided negative. In forming this decision, I trust I have listened to the dictates of conscience more than to those of inclination. I have no personal repugnance to the idea of a union with you, but I feel convinced that mine is not the sort of disposition calculated to form the happiness of a man like you."
And you know what we got here? We got 19th century friend zone.
Yes, I think the last line says, "I shall always be glad to hear from you as a friend."
Oh, burn. just breaking his heart.
She never heard from him again.
Yeah. And I'm sure he probably kept that letter. And then when she got famous, he was like,
true.
I got dumped by Charlotte Bronte.
This letter did survive, so I wonder who kept it. But in case you're curious.
Yeah, who did the other proposals come from?
We got one from another reverend, David Price, who knew her father. Then a man who worked with her publishing company named Joe Taylor, a cousin named Thomas Bronte Branwell, and finally the man Charlotte did marry, Arthur Bell Nichols, I should say Reverend Arthur Bell Nichols, who proposed twice, the first time in 1852 when Charlotte refused him, and then a second time in 1854 when she found she did have feelings for him.
Well, I mean, it worked out well, sort of, but I did think it's crazy how the descriptions of some of these men who proposed to her seemed like they may have all been inspirations for St. John. They were either religious or they were a cousin.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of crazy. I would like to know more about this publishing company man.
Oh,
this
right.
Joe Taylor. Like, were they around the office or was she there dropping off manuscripts and then
I think he was kind of the liaison. Like he would deliver whatever manuscripts or missiles that came from the publishing company, get to know her a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if he actually fell in love with her.
I could see that.
I think there was some suggestion that he did have feelings for her.
Yeah.
And Charlotte did not have any feelings at all.
You know how it happens with coworkers sometimes, especially, we were joking about how St. John was observing her all that time. And we did he really get to know her? I mean, she was acting a little bit differently.
Right.
But I feel like with Joe Taylor, maybe he got to see the real Charlotte.
Right.
He didn't propose to her because he wanted her to be his wife so that they can go do missionary work or just something like that. He probably really liked her. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of sad to think of what it was like. Because then she wound up just marrying a reverend that was a friend of the family who she'd already, rejected once, right? So she just got worn down, basically. But hey, as long as if she truly had feelings for him, then good for her, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. She did wind up with someone she really cared for, so that's great.
Yeah.
So now we come to the last segment of our podcast. Mike, what is your most meaningful passage or quote from this chapter?
Well, again, this is a very long chapter. There were a lot of quotes to pull from. And so the one I got was from the very end of the chapter.
Oh.
And this is basically Charlotte trying to wrestle with the decision of, should I go with St. John as his sister, or should I reject him because I don't really have any love for him? And so she says, quote, "But as his wife, at his side always, and always restrained, and always checked, forced to keep the fire of my nature continually low, to compel it to burn inwardly and never utter a cry, though the imprisoned flame consumed vital after vital, this would be unendurable." And I feel like, it's admirable that she's willing to go with him as his sister, to sort of carry on the Lord's work. But yeah, that passionate fire in her heart is going to keep burning, and she's always going to want to be loved. And I think that's what makes her such a strong and memorable character.
Yeah. Oh, great quote. I do like that passage a lot. So I'm glad you picked it. It's not what I picked.
Not what you picked. Okay.
No.
I was hoping we might have a fourth quote where we shared the same quote, but not this time. What was your most meaningful passage?
This is a quote where Jane is kind of commenting on her own personality before St. John takes her outside and makes that proposal. So she says, "I know no medium. I never in my life have known any medium in my dealings with positive, hard characters antagonistic to my own, between absolute submission and determined revolt. I have always faithfully observed the one, up to the very moment of bursting, sometimes with volcanic vehemence, into the other, and as neither present circumstances warranted nor my present mood inclined me to mutiny, I observed careful obedience to St. John's directions, and in 10 minutes I was treading the wild track of the glen, side by side with him." I like that quote because I kind of identify with Jane feeling like, I will bear something with a lot of patience until I just can't bear it anymore.
Okay, sure.
And this passage really foreshadows Jane's break with St. John, where she says, she's going to submit to what he says until she absolutely cannot anymore. It's going to be a very hard break for her. And I think it also shows, we see that with how Jane reacted to Mrs. Reed. And, she says that for 10 years or so, she bore being bullied and mistreated by the Reed family until she snaps. And then she's total mutiny.
Okay. I like that line that I know no medium.
Yeah. It's one or the other for her.
Yeah. Like I said, and then now we're going to see that definite break. I mean, I can't remember. We'll find out in the next chapter, but I can remember, when does she leave?
What instigates that?
Yeah, because I feel like, okay, this is the next. We talk about these different acts of this book. We are in the third act, but we've only got 4 more chapters. We're wrapping this book up.
Right.
And so, where are we going next?
Jane's got to go.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. This really helps us grow and reach new listeners. If you want to talk Jane Eyre with me online, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at AirGuide. That's EYRE.
And if you want to hear more from me, I host my own podcast called Out of Touchstone, where my good friend Chad and I discuss all the films that Disney produced for their Touchstone Pictures label. You can also find me on Twitter at Mike DeKalb.
Thank you, and farewell for the present.